What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you that this week we will be going back to the normal schedule. This means that for the 6 days of the week, you'll be getting videos with new true scary stories in them, as much as I can keep track of what's submitted to me at least. And on Sundays, there will be the weekly compilation video of all the stories I've read that week. If you guys end up enjoying this particular video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing all of these really helps the channel and the video to do well, and helps to ensure I can keep making these videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments. Even if I can't always respond to them because I'm busy recording and stuff. Without further ado though guys, I will let you enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I currently work at a Dollar Tree. For anybody who doesn't know, this is a dollar value store. Actually, the one I work at is more like $1.25 now, but you get the point. This is an event that took place 2 months ago now. I'm a female and a part-time employee, and so I work all kinds of different shifts. It's pretty random, honestly. Really, just whenever I'm needed. Sometimes I work mornings, other times I work well into the night. I'm also trained to do multiple things in the store, like be a cashier, stocking the shelves, and various other tasks as well. One day, I was working a Saturday shift. I think I was working from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. or so. When I got to work, I was the cashier for a while, but that was only for the first couple of hours. For the next part of my shift, we had 2 other employees working. So they manned the registers, while I went and did some other tasks. We were a little bit busy, but the store wasn't too crowded or anything. I remember that around 4 p.m. or so, I had a very bad interaction with the man who had entered the store. I had been stalking a shelf in the back for about 5 minutes. I started to walk away when I was done, and as I was walking down an aisle near the back corner, there was a man just waiting there. I didn't really notice him until he stopped me when I was walking past. He said he needed help with something, and that it wouldn't take long. Before long, though, the man started to say many inappropriate things to me. It started with him basically trying to pick me up, but I wasn't interested. I tried to shake it off, but the man continued talking. It was making me feel a bit uncomfortable. I told him to stop with all the bullshit. The man was pretty short, had dark hair, and was somewhat skinny, so I didn't feel like I was in too much danger. There were also many other people around, and my coworkers were there as well. I started walking away from the guy now that I knew he was just wasting my time, but he began to follow me. He was walking and still talking, but he was much more quiet now. He was telling me not to walk away from him and asking me what my problem was. Even as I went over to my other coworkers, the man continued to harass me. I told the man to stop louder now and told him to leave me alone. When he didn't go away, my coworker finally got involved. At this point, the man finally left and walked out the store. I was glad that he was gone now. Every now and then we would get some really strange customers, but I'd never dealt with someone that persistent before. After that, I just went right back to work like nothing happened, and continued on for the next few hours. Everything was going pretty smoothly, actually. I went back to the cashier for a couple of hours at some point, and me and the other employees switched back and forth. I was almost off now, and had less than an hour left to go in my shift. It was 8-something at night. The store was much quieter now. I headed to organize some shelves. One thing about our store is that many of the shelves get extremely disorganized throughout the day. Don't know why people do this, but I sort of enjoy reorganizing everything, and making it look as nice and presentable as possible. Something I really only get the opportunity to do when the store is really quiet, though. I walked to the back corner of the store and everything seemed to be empty. There were a lot of things needing to be organized, so I started working. I was maybe 2 or 3 minutes in when I heard a strange noise off to my right. There were these 2 large boxes in the aisle. I'm not sure exactly what had been in them, maybe a bunch of toy balls or something like that. As I looked over, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that same man from earlier suddenly emerge from within one of those boxes. He had been hiding inside of it for who knows how long. Before I could even react, the man jumped out of the box while staring right at me and proceeded to charge toward me. I moved away. This guy had to be insane or something. He backed me into the complete corner of the store. I asked the man what he was doing, but he wouldn't say anything. He just kept moving in closer. There were a bunch of baskets stacked nearby. I grabbed one of them as the man got within 5 feet of me and used it as a shield against him in case he kept coming closer. He got within a few feet, and I swung the basket at him. I told him loudly to leave me alone, and he told me to shut up and be quiet. I was hoping that I was loud enough that my coworker could hear me. The man was standing there with just this shopping basket between us. He asked me to leave the store with him. Obviously, I said no. As he continued trying to coax me, I heard my coworker approaching. When she entered the aisle, the man actually had the audacity to tell her to go away. My coworker threatened to call the police, and the man began to step away from me and towards my coworker. I backed her up, and the man, feeling overwhelmed, finally turned tail and walked out of the store. He walked along the sidewalk out front and disappeared out of sight. We were both worried he would come back, or that he was simply waiting outside for us to get off work. My coworker watched by the door, and I went around the store and checked. I realized there were no other shoppers inside. We decided to lock the doors and close up early just to be safe. We also called the police. They came out and we told them everything about this guy. They looked around a little bit, but he was long gone. After that, both of us went home. We reported the man to our other coworkers, and he was permanently banned from the store. Luckily, I haven't seen him since then, and I'm really hoping he never comes back either. I was by myself at home a few years ago. A really bad storm hit. I lived alone in a smaller house in the suburbs. It was probably around 8 p.m. when it started raining. Just before the sun had set, I had noticed the clouds were getting pretty dark, and it seemed that a storm was brewing. The wind also picked up around that time, and after the sun had set, the rain began. Things picked up quite a bit from there. There was a severe thunderstorm warning in my area, so I was staying inside this night. Other than the storm, though, everything was going pretty normally. I did hear thunder outside occasionally. About 20 or 30 minutes into the storm, though, the power shut off suddenly. Out went my TV, the lights, everything. It became pitch black and everything went silent as well. Now I could only hear the sounds of the falling rain outside and the thunder every now and then. It wasn't uncommon for the power to go out in a really bad storm. It had happened multiple times over the year that I had lived there. Usually it wouldn't be out for too long, maybe a couple hours at most. I went on my phone for a while because I couldn't do much else. At one point I went over to the front window and just looked outside, watching the storm rain down. The water was coming down very heavily. I could see my entire front yard, parts of the streets, and a couple of neighbors' houses getting really pelted. As I sat there, looking out the front window for quite a while, at some point I noticed someone just walking down the street. This was quite odd, because the area he was walking down had no sidewalk. It was also weird to see somebody walking in such a heavy thunderstorm. The person was wearing a dark black rain jacket and appeared to be a man. I couldn't tell very well, though. He walked down the street in front of my home and seemed to pass it. I left the window and sat back down on the couch. For the next 10 minutes, I was just on my phone, sitting on the couch in the living room. Out of nowhere, I heard what sounded like somebody trying to jimmy open the back door to my house. Instantly, it made me a little bit nervous, but I thought that couldn't possibly be happening. It was surely the sound of something else. I mean, the storm was sort of loud, so maybe something got blown into the back door or something. With my power being out, I could hear things from outside much better. I walked around slowly to the back end of the home, where my kitchen was. I looked out of a back window to see what was going on. Because my house was so dark inside, I had much better visibility when looking out the back than what I did when I looked out the windows near the door. I still saw nothing, though. This made me feel at least a little bit better. That is, until I looked at the rest of the yard a little closer. As I did, I noticed the same man I'd seen walking down the street was hiding in my backyard. He was not a very big man at all. He was at the far side near the fence, crouched down in the corner of the yard. It appeared as though he was going to try to sneak into my next-door neighbor's backyard. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing. It was still pouring rain out. I thought that at any moment the man might look over and see me in the window, so I moved away from it and crept back toward my living room. I didn't really know what to do about this situation. I stayed there for about 20 minutes. At that point, I began to hear a knocking sound coming from the back door of my home. That was really surprising to me. I was sure the man in the backyard was leaving. I knew there was no one else this could be but him, though. The knocking was loud and startling. I got up and walked over to look out the window again, but when I got there, nobody was at the back door. I looked out the back window and all around my yard, but I couldn't see where the man had gone. I kept my eyes vigilant for 10 minutes, but I saw no movement whatsoever. I went back into the living room. After that, there were no more knocks or strange noises. Less than an hour later, the storm stopped, and my power was restored. I kept an eye out for the rest of the night, but I didn't see the guy again. A couple of years ago, a group of friends and I planned a camping trip in Yellowstone Park. The four of us had been camping multiple times in national parks before, but never one the size of Yellowstone. It was going to be close to a week-long trip of sightseeing and enjoying nature. We had planned everything out well the first couple days of the trip, determining where we would be camping, places to see. After those first couple days, though, we didn't really have much of a plan. We decided that part of the adventure was just going to be a spontaneous activity, going wherever interested us. The first part of the trip went very well. We saw a lot of popular tourist attractions and had fun. Hanging out at night together around our campsite was so enjoyable. Towards the end of the trip, however, we were looking for a campsite to camp for the night, and were having a hard time finding one. This was at the stage of our trip where nothing was planned. It was already dark out, late at night, and every campground in the nearby area we visited was already full. They didn't have any room for us. Eventually, we drove past an open lot area that had some scattered fire pits created with stones. It looked like a good spot to camp at. The area wasn't online and didn't show up as a named campsite on Google Maps, but people had clearly camped here before. The area was empty and we didn't see anyone else, so we decided to set up camp there for the night. We had to set up the tent in the dark with just flashlights to guide our way. It was already late, unlike our other nights of the trip, so we didn't really hang out at all. We just crawled into the tent and fell asleep. Relatively quickly, I was woken up in the middle of the night. My friends had shaken me awake and were quietly whispering that something seemed off. Immediately, I understood what they were talking about because from the woods surrounding our campsite, there were a strange number of bird-like noises being made. It was still in the middle of the night and nowhere near close to the morning, so there really shouldn't have been so many birds calling out. It seemed there were multiple different types of bird sounds every couple of minutes. As a group, we agreed quietly, and without turning on any sort of light to exit our tent and check it out, we left and ended up huddling beside our car, which was nearby. We had used the headlights to help us set up our tent earlier, as we waited for our eyes to adjust to the darkness and notice if we could see anything. The bird sounds began to get closer. All of a sudden, they stopped altogether. We knew that these sounds were not normal. It had to be someone communicating with each other somehow, as they had been coming from the direction of the woods. It only took a quick non-verbal look at each other to decide that getting in the car would be the smartest thing to do right now. We scrambled to get in, and then turned on the engine. What we saw running out of the woods towards us was a line of humans. I call them humans because I couldn't even tell if they were men or women. They were so dirty and feral looking. We drove out of there as fast as we could. We saw even more people on the opposite side of the wood line when our headlights illuminated that direction. We drove through the night, all the way until we made it out of Yellowstone Park. We abandoned our tent, since all of us had our important valuables we needed stored in the car. None of us can really determine or remember exactly what area of the park we were in, but it definitely wasn't near a populated campground. We agreed to cut our camping trip a bit short after that, and just buy a hotel for the last night. We didn't go camping together again for a very long time after that scary night in Yellowstone. This happened 2 years ago now. I went shopping in a very large mall that's fairly close to where I live. I had been there many times before and was mostly familiar with it. It was a weekend when I was there, and there were countless other people around. I parked in a parking garage and went inside the mall, shopping for a few hours. I got quite a few different things, so after I was finally done with all my shopping, I started to head out of the mall. By this time, it was around 4 or 5 p.m. Things were much quieter now, but there were still a decent amount of other people. I left them all to go back to my car in the parking garage. I remembered I had parked on the 4th level. When I arrived to my vehicle, which was parked up against one end, I noticed there were not a lot of cars around. I also noticed something on my vehicle that seemed strange. As I walked closer, I realized there were what appeared to be multiple photographs, all taped to my car. Some were on the windshield, others were on the side window. In total, my car was covered by about 10 photographs. I was very confused at first and had no idea who would have even bothered to do this. Then I actually looked at the contents of the pictures. Most of them were of me, and they were taken that same day as I shopped in the mall. Most of the pictures appeared to be taken at a distance, and some of them were zoomed in a decent amount. One of them, though, was taken just feet away from me. The person had clearly been walking directly behind me. It sent a shiver down my spine. I took all the pictures off my car and looked around the parking garage. All of a sudden, I was paranoid that I was being watched. I didn't see anybody, but there were multiple possible hiding places. I got inside my car and locked the doors immediately. I started looking at these creepy pictures again. I thought back to my time in the mall and tried to remember seeing anything strange. I really couldn't, though. There were so many people that it would have been easy to hide and take pictures of someone without them knowing. I really had no clue who could have done this or why. I decided I needed to get the hell out of there. As I drove out of the parking garage, there were not too many other cars driving around. While I was descending down to get to the ground level, all of a sudden a car peeled out behind me. After leaving the parking garage, I drove down a road near the mall and then got onto a ramp on the highway. At that point, I noticed the car behind me was doing the same thing. It was following extremely closely. I started to get suspicious. Maybe this was the person who had been taking photos. I also thought that maybe I was just being paranoid. By now, there were lots of other cars on the road. It was a major highway. Still, I kept my eyes on that car behind me. It was a kind of SUV. It maintained an extremely close distance as I continued on with the drive for a while. I had to go on this highway for about 10 minutes. Then I would get off on an exit close to the city I lived in. On the highway itself, nothing changed about this guy following me. There was also nothing too crazy, though. When I took the exit off the highway, the car swerved to follow behind me. That's when I got really nervous. They really had to be following me. It seemed like for some reason, someone was stalking me. I looked up in my mirror, but I couldn't tell who was driving. I didn't have a good enough view. Now that I was off the highway, I was less than 5 minutes from my home. I knew I just couldn't go right there, though. I had to figure out a way to get this guy off me. That's when I decided to drive to the police station. I wasn't sure where the nearest one was, so I put it in the maps on my phone to get directions. Luckily, the station was not too far away. I followed the directions there. The car behind me followed the whole way until the street before the police station. It slammed on its brakes in the middle of the street. I drove to the station, parked, and went inside with all the pictures in tow. I reported everything that happened and gave a description of the car. Unfortunately, I did not get the license plate and couldn't tell the exact model. I felt stupid for not taking better notes of those things. There was not a whole lot that could be done after that. I went home and I was paranoid for the next few days, thinking this person must somehow know where I lived. But they did not bother me again. I even went back to that same mall a couple of weeks later, and nothing happened. To this day, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it was somebody's idea of an elaborate joke. I just hope that nothing like that ever happens again. Back during my childhood, I lived in a neighborhood that had a bunch of kids who were close to my age. We all lived in the same city block. It was an ideal situation for us. After school, we would all get together and play some sort of game outside. Oftentimes, the games would include things like wiffle ball, football, some sort of tag, or other things like that. One day after school, the 6 of us who were outside that day decided to play sardines. The game Sardines is basically like hide and seek, except only one person hides, and then the rest of the group has to split up and try to find them. I ended up being the one who got to hide first. As a group, we had decided to make the game more fun by expanding the boundaries of where we were allowed to hide. Normally, we would only play on our city block, but we expanded it to include the next block over as well. Once the rules had been debated and made clear, I was given 3 full minutes to hide. I sprinted off toward the neighboring block, looking for a good place. I ended up deciding on hiding in the driveway of a yard that had a lot of low-hanging trees growing in it. I found a good spot behind the trash can near the alley that had branches hanging down and covering most of the area. I had only been hiding for a couple of minutes when I heard a soft voice suddenly speak behind me. "Hey, what are you doing?" It was an older gentleman, crouched over and seemingly picking some weeds in the garden. He was about 30 feet behind me. Assuming the man would want me to leave his yard, I stood up and began to leave, apologizing and explaining I was playing some hide and seek with some friends. The man didn't seem too upset about it, though. He actually told me that I wasn't in a very good hiding spot. Instead, I could come into his yard and hide behind the big bush closer to his home. I was a very competitive kid and wanted to stay hidden as long as possible. I agreed and quickly ran in and squatted down behind the big bush in his yard. Instead of going back to picking weeds, the older man went into his house through the back door. Only a few moments later, he leaned out the back door and called out to me. He said that I should come into his house. Then I could watch my friends run by his kitchen window none the wiser. I was pretty young, but I was still old enough to know not to go into a stranger's home. The man kept urging me, saying it would be so funny to watch my friends not be able to find me. He didn't stop trying to persuade me. At this point, I was getting a little nervous. His voice had risen in volume a little bit, and he was clearly getting a bit irritated, pestering me to come inside with him. I decided to get up and move back toward my hiding spot in his driveway, away from his home. When I got up to leave, he took a couple quick steps toward me, still telling me to come inside. Fully frightened now, I ditched the game and sprinted out of his yard back towards my friend's home, where we'd originally began playing. It took a little bit to get all 6 of us back in the same area, and we ended up just playing some wiffle ball for the rest of the evening. I told my parents that night about the man and how adamant he was of getting me inside his home. My parents banned me from going anywhere near his house again, as well as from playing the game Sardines. I'm glad that my parents educated me well when I was younger, and I was smart enough to know not to go into that strange man's house. Maybe the old man's intentions weren't as bad as I suspect, but it was extremely suspicious just how persistent he was on getting me to go inside his home. This happened when I was much younger. I was around 12 years old or so. I remember that when I was growing up, we had a house that had a really big backyard. It was so large that there were several acres of dense woods beyond our little open area. We would often have all kinds of animals pass through the backyard, but by far the kind that we would see the most were deer. I would also go into the backyard all the time because I was a pretty active kid and enjoyed being outdoors. I didn't ever go very far into the woods because it was so dense and large. It would be easy to get lost, and we didn't have any actual paths back there. One evening, I was out in the backyard, waiting to be called in for dinner. The sun was almost setting, and I remember hearing a noise at the edge of the woods. I looked over and saw a deer standing there. We made eye contact for a moment. The deer stared at me for several seconds before turning and moving back further in. Curious, I wanted to see where it was going, so I followed the deer a little bit. I got to the edge of the woods and saw the deer about 50 feet further in. I then noticed there was another one. I started to move farther and farther into the woods, trying to be careful not to startle the deer. They seemed to be moving away from me anyways, though. I ended up going in pretty deep and following them. The deer had completely disappeared by then, but for some reason I still wanted to see them. Eventually, I gave up and started to head back. By now, I was pretty far out and was surrounded by trees. Plus, it was getting dark outside. I was making my way back when I heard another sound coming from behind me. Figuring it was just another deer, I turned around and looked. I saw a bush being moved about 30 to 40 feet away from me. I thought it had to be an animal. The split second I saw the bush moving, though, it didn't look like it. I kept watching and saw a man emerge from behind it and slip behind a tree. He was so fast that I didn't get a good look at him. It was enough to tell that I didn't know the man, though. It appeared to be some random guy, not one of the neighbors. Nobody that was supposed to be in our yard, certainly. This was really strange. I felt the need to get back to the house right now as fast as possible. For some reason, I couldn't move. I just kept looking directly at the guy. I think I was just in disbelief. After a moment or two, the man emerged from behind the tree. He was looking right at me and started to move in my direction. I turned and started sprinting back for home. I ran probably as fast as I had ever run before. I didn't bother to look back and see where the man was at this point. Soon, I was luckily able to make it back to the open part of our backyard. I kept running and made it inside. I locked the door and then found my parents. I told them about the suspicious man. We then looked out all the windows. The man was nowhere to be seen. He must have stayed within the woods. My dad went outside to look around and even went a short ways into the woods. He came back and said he didn't see or hear anything. He even called out asking if anybody was there. Had no signs of the man. He said the guy must have left, probably realizing he shouldn't be here. I felt much better knowing I was now safe inside. The rest of the night was fine, and I went to bed around the time I usually did. Before I fell asleep, though, I was laying in my bed and had my window open a crack to get some cool air inside. I heard the wind and sound of crickets, but then I heard another sound, the sound of somebody walking out in the yard, nearby my window. I looked over, and at first saw nothing. Then a man came into view, the same man I had seen in the woods earlier. He started walking right up to my window. Somehow I had the awareness to immediately run over and slam the window shut and lock it. The man just walked right up to my face on the other side and stared me down. It was a terrifying moment, but I'm glad I closed that window. I bolted out of my room. Luckily, my parents were still awake and in the living room. I told them the man had come back. They came to my bedroom, but the man was gone. Once more, my dad went outside into the yard, except this time we called the police as well. They came out and did a search of the property, but obviously couldn't cover the entire woods. Unfortunately, the man was able to get away. I slept with my lights on and windows covered for weeks after, but surprisingly, the man never attempted to come back. I never did see him again. Thinking about that experience still gives me the creeps. I'm really glad I was able to close my window on time. For the last couple years, I've been working at a liquor store. Recently, the management has decided to expand our business by offering a liquor delivery service as well. I ended up being one of the workers whose job primarily switched to deliveries, and I've enjoyed it so far. Now I get tips from customers added to my regular pay. I had been doing these deliveries for about a month or so, and things were going pretty smoothly. All the deliveries were fairly close to our store, and we were getting a lot of them, with people trying out our new service. Last week, on a Thursday afternoon, there was a delivery order sent in online that was a little bit farther away than all the others we normally do. Since it was a slow day, though, I decided to take it. I packaged up their order, which included a couple of bottles of liqueur and a case of beer, and a couple boxes of cigarettes, double-checked that I had everything, and set out on my way. As I got closer to the destination, I noticed that I was actually leaving the city limits and was driving into the rundown outskirts of town, where everything was old. Many houses and places were abandoned. Eventually, I reached a destination that maps had directed me to. It was at this point I became very skeptical of this order. The location where the maps had taken me was a vacant plot of land, very high with overgrown grass and shrubs. In the middle of it, I could just about make out the top part of an RV. There was a beaten-down path leading to the middle of what felt like a prairie. I was nervous, but I still felt I had to bring the order to that RV. I grabbed the box with the alcohol and cigarettes from the back of my vehicle and slowly began walking down the path into that tall grass. I approached the door of the RV and heard some low-volume chattering coming from inside. I didn't even want to knock on the door, so I just called out, "Delivery for Mark?" That was the name on the order. The voices from inside stopped, and after a quick moment, a man's deep voice called out, "Come on in, the door's unlocked." Normally, we have to check IDs of the person to ensure they're over 21, but I was so freaked out at this point that I didn't care. I was definitely not going into that RV. Without even saying anything, I put the box down on the ground where I was standing and ran back to my car. I got in and drove away as fast as I could. I happened to glance back as I was driving away, and what I saw horrified me. A man had just emerged from the path out of the tall grass. In his arm, hanging down by his side, he was holding a machete. It was hard to tell for certain, but it looked like it had dried bloodstains on it. After that incident, the liquor store created a new policy on the distance of deliveries, so we wouldn't have to drive out to such a far area again. It was a blood-chilling experience for me, and even still when I do deliveries, I'm extra cautious about it. Back when I was in high school, I remember that my friends and I found this secret room inside of the school. The room wasn't actually hidden or anything. It was just a classroom that was no longer used. Now it was vacant and just stored a bunch of random things in it. You see, the school I went to was pretty old, but it had been renovated several times. This caused the overall layout to be somewhat strange. This classroom was in the corner of a very quiet hallway, not at all in an area that would normally get a lot of foot traffic. My friend Michael was the one who originally found it. I'm not sure how. I guess he must have been curious and just tried opening the door. Apparently the lock on it didn't work, so it just opened right away. Michael, me, and 2 other friends are the ones who knew about it. We had a bit of a friend group and went in. It was interesting to see all of the stuff in there. It had things from over 10 years ago, old assignments from various teachers, old equipment, box TVs on those stands with wheels, old whiteboards as well. The room had desks scattered about and various books. It was quite cluttered. It had carpeted floors, surprisingly. My friends and I would occasionally go into this room and hang out before school, between classes, during lunch, any other random time, really. It had basically turned into our secret hiding spot for the friend group. We were certain that nobody else knew we were in there. We made sure that nobody was looking whenever we went in, which was pretty easy. One day, in between classes, I went there with 3 other friends. It was right before our last class of the day. Michael had told us to meet there in our friend group chat. He wanted to talk about some plans to hang out and play basketball over the weekend. I remember that everybody left to go to their classes, except for me and Michael. We had class together, and it was really close by. We were still sitting at our desks talking when we heard this sound come over the school intercom. It was strange because I didn't know what it was about. Shortly after, we heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. In my entire time in high school to that point, we had never had a single real lockdown before. I didn't really know what the reason for it was, but I was a little nervous. Obviously, in a lockdown, you're supposed to go to the nearest classroom, and nobody's allowed to be out in the hallways. Michael and I thought about walking to our class, but decided to stay in that hidden room we were in. I mean, technically, we were in a classroom after all, and nobody probably even knew that we were here. Maybe they didn't even know this room existed. There had been lockdown drills at the school before, so we knew the basics of what you're supposed to do. Turn the lights out in the classroom and lock the door. There was already a cover over the small window on the door to this classroom, so whether the light was on or off, you really couldn't tell from the hallway. We left it on. I went to try and lock the door. However, I remembered that the lock on the door did not function. That's how we were able to get in the first place. We figured that wasn't a big deal, though. Michael and I just sat in random desks in the room and talked and went on our phones. We waited for the lockdown to be over. Neither of us had any idea as to what it was for. Other than us, things were very quiet. We texted some friends trying to figure out what was happening, but nobody seemed to know. I would say about 15 minutes into the lockdown. We heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I was sitting not too far away from the door, so I got up and turned the light off just in case. The footsteps continued to get closer, and Michael and I began to get concerned. We probably weren't supposed to be here in the first place, so whoever this was, if they came into the room, we'd have to hide very quickly. We decided to find a hiding place right now. There was so much junk in the room that it really wasn't too hard to find one. Michael and I took about 10 seconds to get into our places. He went to the far corner of the room and hid behind a cabinet. I hid on the ground to the side of a desk. The classroom was very dark, so it would not be obvious we were in here. Just moments after hiding, the footsteps reached right outside the door. The knob turned and the door opened. We heard somebody entering. I looked up from where I was and saw a man walking in. I couldn't really tell what he looked like because of just how dark it was. I was confident he could not see me though. When the guy got inside the room, he closed the door quietly, then stood just inside the entrance. After a few moments, he took a few steps inside. Michael and I were both trying to be as quiet as possible. I literally held my breath for a while before breathing as quietly as possible. The man was just standing around a few feet inside the room for a while. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure who this guy was. Did he work for the school or was he the cause of the lockdown? This guy didn't seem like a teacher, and I didn't know why he would enter this room at all. I was starting to think it was the latter. Out of nowhere, Michael made a noise. I think he moved slightly. I'm not sure why, but you could just barely hear it because of how quiet it was. When that happened, I heard the man in the room suddenly move and begin to speak. "What was that? Is somebody in here?" My heart started beating like crazy. I didn't move or make a sound. Michael did the same. After a few moments of silence, the man called out again, asking who was there. He sounded aggravated and even a little nervous maybe. Michael and I did not dare to make a peep. We heard the man quickly walk to the doorway. The door opened and seconds later the man left. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I'm sure that Michael did the same. We stayed in our hiding places for a while though, just in case the man were to come back. 20 minutes later, there was an announcement that the lockdown was over. We felt much better when we left the classroom and went to our final class of the day. Later after school, we were able to find out that the lockdown was caused by a suspicious man that snuck inside. Based on what I heard, I'm 100% certain that the man who entered that classroom we were in was the very same guy. He must have been attempting to find a place to hide. We were already in there. Michael must have scared him off. I'm really glad the guy didn't try to really find us or anything and just left. This scary situation happened to me many summers ago. At the time, I was living in low-income housing, funded by the government. I had just graduated college and still did not have much money, so I was able to qualify for the small 2-story living space, which I was in. The way low-income housing was set up, there were many units in a row, sort of like a motel style. I shared a wall with a neighbor to both my right and my left. This particular night, I had gotten off work at 11 p.m. I got home and made something quick to eat, then climbed into the shower to get ready for bed. I had only been in the shower for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a banging at my front door. I hurriedly dried off and threw on some clothes, then went downstairs and approached the door. As I rounded the corner, I was hit with a bright light and told to put my hands up. A policeman pointed a gun directly toward me through the glass window on the door. Terrified, I threw my hands up and followed their orders. They told me to open the door. After they got inside, the officers had to settle me down a bit from the shock. Seeing a gun pointed at me through the door window was extremely terrifying. They went on to explain to me that they were looking for someone in the area suspected of a recent murder. The police had received a call from a witness that the person had been attempting to enter units in my stretch of the building. The witness had directed police toward my place as one of the places the suspect had attempted to enter. The police requested to search my unit, but I was exhausted at this point and ready for bed. I assured them that I had been home for over an hour now and everything was all fine in my unit. The police apologized for the scare and moved on to check the other units in my area. It was after midnight by now, and after the police encounter, I was tired and ready for bed. I fell asleep quickly that night, but woke up in the middle of the night for what I thought at first was a random reason. I checked my phone and saw it was close to 3:30. As I was in bed, about to drift back to sleep, I heard some odd noises coming from the bedroom across the hall. When I had first moved into this unit, I had a roommate, but they had moved out a couple months prior. I mostly used their bedroom for storage purposes. I went out into the hall to check it out, because the noises, although quiet, were continuing. The walls were thin, so sometimes you could hear stuff the neighbors were doing through the walls. I had to pee anyway. I went into the hallway. I couldn't tell still if the noises were coming from inside the closed door of the spare bedroom or through the neighbor's wall, which was shared with that bedroom. I stood right outside that door and said, "Hello?" in my normal voice. The noises stopped immediately, persuading me that there was indeed someone or something in that spare bedroom. Remembering the whole encounter previously with the police, I frantically ran back to my room and locked the door, then immediately dialed 911. While I was on the phone with the police, I heard the bedroom door burst open and someone sprinting down the stairs and out the back door. I never heard if the police ended up finding the suspect, but it's scary to think I had spent the whole night with a murderer in my place. The next morning, I saw the screen had been cut open in one of my back windows, which is how the suspect would have entered my unit. Every place that I've lived in since then, I double-check that my windows are locked before I leave. My best guess is the suspect was going to wait out the night in that bedroom and leave after I left for work the next day, but I'll never know of their true intentions or what they had been doing in the middle of the night, which was the reason for those odd noises. When I was a kid, we lived a little bit out in the country. I was 12 at the time of this story, and would often be out in the front yard or driveway. Our yard was big, and the driveway was long. I was always playing basketball or something like that. One afternoon, as I was toward the end of the driveway where a hoop was, I was practicing, when out of nowhere, I began hearing this music playing in the distance. I didn't even know what it was at first, but I looked over and saw an ice cream truck emerging from around the corner. This truck looked really old and beat up. It wasn't one of those really nice and friendly looking ones, but one that you would immediately think looked suspicious or creepy. When I saw it, I turned and started running away. At that point, I don't think I'd ever seen an ice cream truck come down our street before in my entire life. That's how far out in the country we were. Any car coming down the street would make me suspicious, let alone an ice cream truck. I knew as I was running away that it was likely nothing bad, but for some reason I felt the instinctual need to run. It took me a while to get up our long driveway, and by the time I got back in front of the house, I stopped to watch that truck. I expected to see it just drive by our home. I was curious as to why an ice cream truck was even on our street. I noticed that the truck had stopped right in front of our driveway, though. At this point, I was standing near this large tree, about 10 feet away from the entrance to my home. As I was watching, I moved behind the tree and continued to observe this ice cream truck. It had stopped in front of our driveway, blocking it entirely. I was confused as to why it had done this, and as to who was driving it. I waited there and kept watching. About 2 or 3 minutes went by. I felt like I was in a standoff with the truck driver. He had to have seen me running up the driveway as it approached. I finally saw the truck start to back up and felt relieved for a second. I thought it was leaving, but I was still confused as to why it was backing up and not driving forward. That's when the truck started to turn. After it did, the truck entered our driveway. When I saw that truck coming up the driveway, I ran for the house and got inside as fast as I could. I locked the door behind me and ran around trying to find my parents. When I finally did, I told them what was happening. We went to the front window and looked out, but by then the truck was completely gone. I didn't know what had happened to it, but I guess the guy had finally drove away. After that, I never saw that ice cream truck again. In fact, after that occurred, I don't think I ever saw any ice cream truck on our street ever again. And that's the only time I'm aware of that an ice cream truck of any time had come anywhere near our area. It was one of the strangest and most suspicious things I've ever seen. It still gives me the creeps when I think about it to this day. I don't know who was driving that truck or why they chose our street. Why would they stop in front of the driveway and then start driving into it? All just very suspicious and strange. In December of 2015, I was making a north-to-south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my young 20s, driving home for the semester break. I was driving south through Kentucky on I-65 at around 11:30 p.m. I was still about an hour away from the city where I was going to stop for the evening. There were no other cars on the road at all, and I had not seen any in quite some time. That part of the I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes in each direction. It was in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in my rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing, clicked off the phone, and waited for the truck to pass me by. The truck got right even with my car, and instead of completing the pass, they matched my speed and stayed beside me. The driver then turned on the spotlight inside of the truck and shone it down directly into the cabin of my car and right on my face. I was confused. I had never seen a truck do anything like this before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed like a very long minute, and I was starting to get extremely creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead and slowed my speed so the truck would finish passing me by. The truck turned off the light and completed the pass, moving from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was creeped out by this, slowed down some more, and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and this big rig. As soon as I moved into the leftmost lane, though, the truck matched my speed and moved over to the middle lane to come parallel to my vehicle. The driver turned on the light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I had now confirmed this truck driver was definitely following me and being super creepy. I kept my gaze straight ahead. I felt like if I looked over, it would somehow make it even worse. And the truck turned off the spotlight and pulled up right in front of my car in the leftmost lane. I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up significantly. I was probably going above the speed limit, about 80 miles per hour. By the time I completed my merge, I saw the truck beginning to shift toward me again and speeding up to match me. Before they could pull up next to me, I decided it was time to get the hell out of there. I floored it. I sped up to 95 miles per hour, the fastest I had ever driven in my entire life. I put a mile of distance between me and this truck before trying to slow down some. I looked up to my rearview mirror, and I'll never forget this image. This big orange tractor trailer, illuminated by the street lamps of the highway interchange, was absolutely devouring the distance between us. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed. Must have been going 100 miles an hour. I sped up again, but it didn't matter. The truck caught right up to me, pulled beside me, and turned the spotlight on my face once more. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed and not daring to look over. It was at this time I decided my only advantage was the maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind their vehicle. They moved over into the right lane, and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind this truck in its blind spot so they couldn't find me. I saw a sign for an exit nearby and decided this is how I would make my escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we neared the exit area. I waited until the last possible moment. Once the truck was beyond the point where the exit split away, I darted out from behind and swerved into it. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far away from the interstate I should go and if the truck would come back looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right by the interstate. I parked, got out, and inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage. Maybe the driver was simply trying to warn me of something wrong with my car. There was nothing wrong at all. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was really gone. I then got back onto the interstate and continued to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I did not use I-65 again. The creepiest true story that I remember from when I was very young. We had a nice old man neighbor, probably in his 70s or early 80s, that lived right across the street from us. Had a big, beautiful black lab. His name was Lee, and her name was Booger. She was the nicest dog ever. We used to see Lee out on his porch all the time or in his yard. We would always say hi, and sometimes my dad would go and have some beers with him later in the evening. Really nice guy. Anyway, then came this hot summer, and I mean really hot, 110 degrees for at least a month. In Michigan, that's ridiculous. We didn't see Lee out on his porch or in the yard for a couple of days. We figured he was probably staying inside with the AC, being as he was an older fella. We went to visit my aunt for 3 days after that, because she was awesome and had a pool. When we came back, my dad went to visit Lee. I just remember everyone being really upset when he returned. Not just an old man died upset. My dad was vomiting in the grass when he came back. Even an hour later, he wouldn't talk about what he had seen, even to my mom. I know he gave a statement to the police, and I remember seeing them taking Lee's dog away. I was crying because Booger was such a nice dog, and I wanted to keep her if Lee had passed away. I didn't understand what happened at the time. It wasn't until I was older that my dad opened up to me about it. He was drunk when he did. He needed to get it off his chest. He had never even told my mother. He said that when he'd gone into that house, the smell was horrible. Thick, oily, like you could almost feel it coating your mouth. The first thing he noticed was the lights all being off and all the flies. There were flies all over. Lee wasn't anywhere to be seen right off the bat, so my dad looked around the house. He got into the hallway when he heard a weird noise in the back bedroom, a repeating noise. At first, he thought it was a clicking noise, but as he got closer, it started to sound more wet. He opened the door to the back bedroom, and the stink hit him in the face like a ton of bricks. He almost passed out from the strength of the stench. He threw up right there in the doorway before he even got the chance to look. As he did look over, there was Lee in his bed, or what was left of him. His head and shoulders were still intact, sure, but from the chest down, my dad said he was missing most of his flesh, entirely gone. The dog still had her muzzle buried in him and was working on chewing a hole through his legs. The dog didn't even stop or notice him. He slammed the door and booked it home. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.